Corum to present for us today in seminar. A little bit of background on Eric. A lot of you know him. He's a PhD student in our biomechanics program here. He did his undergrad at Texas A&M, master's at Arkansas, and now here at UK. He's had professionally he's had a number of different positions in strength and conditioning since 2006, I guess. But probably most notably, he was the director of exercise science or sports science at Florida State University for football there. And then now the last 4 years, he's been the high performance coach for UK football. So his presentation topic today is going to be a preliminary proposal to his dissertation topic. So it'll be a good run through for him and stuff. And it's on a topic that's very important for athletic performance, and that is sleep. So hopefully everyone got a good night's rest last night and didn't indulge in too much libation. That's not good on the old sleep cycle either. So please help me in welcoming Eric Corum.
Thank you. Excited to be here. So let's get started. Today we're going to discuss a few things. First, we're going to talk about what is sleep, how do we sleep, why do we sleep, sleep and its effect on exercise and performance, which are two different topics. A model for sleep that I've come up with as it relates to sports performance and in my study aims. By no means is this a complete review of everything out there, because sleep is just blowing up right now. I just had the opportunity to be at the NFL Combine, and no joke, the first question I received from a general manager was a question about sleep. It's on everybody's minds. You know, we're wearing these tracking devices now. People are aware that sleep could impact performance. And so this is an exciting field to be studying right now. So what is sleep? It's a homeostatically regulated state of reduced movement and sensory responsiveness that occurs over 24-hour periods of time. It's phasic in nature. It occurs in about 90-minute cycles. And we're going to kind of dive into that here in a minute, but you kind of have alternations between REM and non-REM sleep. We know right now that it's necessary for both cognitive and physiological function. However, the mechanisms that really drive the sleep-wake cycle have yet to be fully elucidated. So it's kind of a mystery. How do we sleep? I'm going to start with talking about something called the two-process model for sleep regulation. It was put forth by Alexander Borbely. And this is probably the most intensive section that we're going to have here. But it's a good place to start because it conceptually sorts out two major influences on sleep: the circadian pacemaker and the homeostatic need for sleep. And those are two things. So in this model, process S represents the homeostatic need for sleep, and process C represents the circadian pacemaker. And in this model, there's an interaction between these two processes. Process C, the circadian pacemaker, kind of contains or creates thresholds for our need for sleep. So as the day goes on, your need for sleep increases in an exponential saturating way. And at some point, that need for sleep reaches a critical threshold, and then we fall asleep. And then it declines in an exponential way, and then this bottom threshold is the waking state, where the body goes, okay, it's time to wake up. Process S is a regulated variable. Okay, it's homeostatic. Its dynamics are derived from EEG slow wave activity. So the reason why people really like this model is because math can be applied to it. And you know that if you can't actually do some statistical analysis on a model, it's going to have a hard time standing up. And this model has stood for a while. Process C is the circadian instantaneous tracking for the need of sleep. And the circadian process is under dominant control, not complete control, by something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus located in the hypothalamus. The waxing and the waning of process S is regulated by this circadian pacemaker. And the circadian pacemaker receives clues on how to interact with its environment based on something called zeitgebers, or time givers, such as sunlight, humidity, and temperature. And those help coordinate human biology and behavior to the sleep-wake cycle, the most important of which is sunlight, as you guys know. You probably have heard that it's really important that when you sleep to make your room as dark as possible, turn your cell phone over, because any small interaction with sunlight or blue wave light can affect your sleep processes. So the circadian pacemaker, they say, has limited control for this reason. Has anybody traveled across a significant number of time zones before, like overseas? Yeah, recently I had to take a trip to Portland, Oregon, and I was screwed up for a number of days. We are very sensitive to changes in time zones, and so there's limited control that the circadian pacemaker has. According to this model, process S is regulated by process C, but it's also can be changed by our conscious decision making. For instance, I'm going to sleep in this morning, or I'm going to go have Starbucks at 7 o'clock at night, and the caffeine intake is going to keep me up for a while. So our conscious decision making can also affect the interaction of these two processes. Research is yet to pinpoint the exact regulatory mechanism for the sleep-wake cycle, as the body of literature is composed of mechanistic studies done on phylogenetically diverse populations. For instance, worms to humans to squirrel monkeys. So sleep research is kind of all over the place, because some of the stuff that you can do on a worm or a squirrel monkey you can't exactly do on a human. Some studies that are disruptive in nature, for instance pharmacological studies looking at interaction with neurochemicals, or even lesion studies on animals, have found places or anatomical landmarks that can affect sleep. However, none have been able to pinpoint an exact anatomical landmark that can be lesioned that removes sleep, or an anatomical landmark that has complete circadian control. It's very interesting. So in my view, sleep should be viewed as an all-encompassing system that has no locus of complete control. It's a global process that is regulated by a circadian need, a homeostatic need. Do we really understand it all right now? No, but it's starting to become a little bit more clear. There is no consensus regarding why we sleep. It's a hotly debated topic, but how we sleep is starting to become a little bit more clear. And there's three predominant theories as to why we sleep. Restoration of the endocrine and immune systems. The neurometabolic theory, that sleep assists in the recovery of the nervous and metabolic cost imposed by awakening. And the cognitive development. Dr. Robert Stiggold is the kind of the progenitor of this thought process, that when we sleep plays a vital role in learning, neuroplasticity, and there's a lot of sleep studies done now where they challenge people with different learning objectives, and they want to see how retention and learning occurs. But this is really hotly debated. And this may explain why sleep is a phasic process, because these different phases, they differ in their depth, intensity of dreaming, eye movements, EEG oscillations, neuromodulation of cortical circuits. There's all sorts of things happening during these different phases, and potentially these different reasons or theories for sleep may lead us to understand more why we have phases of sleep. So once again, we see these 90-minute cycles, and I'm just going to briefly go over this here, but we're going to talk a little bit about non-REM sleep and about REM sleep and the differences. During non-REM sleep, you can see this right here, EMG activity is a little bit higher. There's a little bit more tossing and turning, but the really cool thing is during non-REM sleep, especially between the hours of 10 and 2, you see this increase in growth hormone, which we all know is really, really important. Protein synthesis, mobilization of free fatty acids. If you're a training athlete, increases in growth hormone early in sleep are really going to help with tissue repair. We've also found that this process is not just a passively regulated process, rather it's an actively regulated process. There's actually a topographical sequence to how the brain operates during sleep. There's an anterior dominance during non-REM sleep and a posterior dominance during REM sleep. And then as you sleep, there's an anterior to posterior shift. And you can see this in functional MRI. So basically what they're saying is the brain is organizing itself while you're sleeping, and it's not just a haphazard process. There's research now pointing to replenishment of astrocytic glycogen during non-REM sleep. REM sleep, this is a phase where EMG activity is very, very low. The brain is actually partially disconnected from the body, by blocking a corticospinal pathways at the brainstem, and motor activity is suppressed. And because of this, you're in a very relaxed state. There's very little movement taking place, and this helps with myofibrillar restoration, memory consolidation, and potentially emotional regulation. So this REM and non-REM sleep, the way you can kind of look at it is maybe during non-REM sleep we have more hormonal things taking place, and during REM sleep it's really for the brain. So I'm going to show you a couple things. This is a really, really old study done by Takahashi, 1968, but they looked at growth hormone secretion during 1 hour intervals during sleep, and you can see there's this massive spike of growth hormone when you go to bed. And then as the night goes on, it diminishes and cortisol levels increase, which help with the waking process. More recently, Hall et al. Did a study where they looked at growth hormone secretion every 30 seconds during sleep. I'd hate to have been that person, lying there with this thing. But anyways, they found that during non-REM sleep, specifically slow wave sleep over REM sleep, there was these micro spikes, and then it also kind of saw the same trend. You saw this huge spike early in sleep, and then it tapered off as the night goes on. This one is really cool. I think this is absolutely fascinating. Every other part of the body has a lymphatic system, a means to get rid of metabolic waste product, except for the brain. So we thought. Now they found something called the lymphatic system. Okay, and basically what this is the brain-wide perivascular pathway for the exchange of cerebrospinal fluid with interstitial fluid, and this is activated during sleep. It's as if these channels open up for the brain's plumbing system to start just getting rid of crap, okay? How about that? Facilitates efficient clearance of solute and waste from the brain. Soluble amyloid beta clearance is dependent on this pathway, and failure of the system may contribute to amyloid plaque deposition and Alzheimer's disease progression. That's where this is all coming from. So maybe sleep acts as a way for the brain to clear itself out. Just another layer onto this whole mystery. I thought that was pretty awesome. But you guys have found this the past 6 months. So now we're going to kind of dive into some of the metabolic and endocrine function of sleep. This study by Spiegel et al. Has been cited over 2,000 times. It's kind of one of the hallmark papers. It assesses carbohydrate metabolism, thyrotropic function, activity HPA axis, and sympathovagal balance in men. So essentially they're looking at HRV, vagal versus sympathetic activation. So what they did was this. In most of these sleep studies, they have a sleep normalization period, a sleep debt restriction or total deprivation period, and then a normalization period. So for 3 nights, people were in bed for 8 hours. That does not mean they were sleeping for 8 hours. It means they were in bed for 8 hours. Then during phase 2, 6 nights, they were in bed for 4 hours. And then phase 3, 7 nights in bed for 12 hours. Why is this important? Well, to me, it's very interesting because the average American in the early 1900s slept about 9 to 9.5 hours a day. Why? Electricity wasn't as prevalent. Our life kind of was dictated by the cycle of light. Now we're down to about 7.5 hours of sleep a night. They found in shift workers that they sleep about 5 hours a night. Okay, so look what happens here. So you have this period, 3 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, 4 hours, 12 hours, 3, 6, and 7. In just this small period where they restricted sleep, glucose tolerance was reduced, clearance rate of glucose was 40% slower. There was an impairment of carbohydrate tolerance, decreased thyrotropic concentrations, eating cortisol concentrations were elevated, and you had this sympathetic shift in heart rate variability. So the body basically is like, man, I am under a lot of stress. The difference in glucose effectiveness is nearly identical between groups of patients with type 2 diabetes and normal glycemic white men in just a very short period of time. Now, look back at this. This is just me, the education part coming in with what does this represent? 6 nights of 4 hours of sleep in bed. To me, I think about exams, midterms. I know the professors in the room are like, yeah, okay, this may explain why some of my students are a little bit pissed off during that period of time. You know, we go through these phases of time. Think about Olympic competition. This is something that's come up a lot recently, that the vast majority of Olympians do not peak at the Olympics. They peak at world championships or during trials. Maybe it's because they can't sleep, because they have excessive stress, they don't cope well. There's a lot of cool various factors going on. There's other layers to that Olympic thing too, because some people go to the Olympics, it's not a joke, that at the Olympics they know that they're not going to win. They know that they're just gonna barely make it out of their heat, so it's just like one big party. I'm not kidding. It's kind of crazy. If you look at condom distribution at the Olympics, it's pretty nuts. Like I'm not kidding, there's studies on this, like it's nuts. So moving on, sorry this is so small, but Harvard Business Review just recently did a really cool paper on sleep and leadership, executive leadership, okay? And in the executive world, the C-suite as they call it, this is really being valued. Not only are we now concerned about high-performance athletes, we're concerned about high-performance coaches. You gotta think about who's making the decisions on the field. I hope my coaches are sleeping and getting rest when it's a crucial 4th down and they gotta make a decision with 2 minutes left on the clock. Or at least the guy in the box, the analytics expert, which a lot of these NFL teams now look at. My friend is that person for the Chicago Bears, and he makes sure that he goes home early, wakes up late every day, so that on game day he's ready to go. But they found that the prefrontal cortex responds very poorly to sleep deprivation, and it reduces higher order mental skills. So when you get sleep deprived, your problem solving, reasoning, organizing, inhibition, and executing plans is greatly compromised. That doesn't sound like something that I want to have an executive leader making very important decisions. You know, like we got generals or people out in the field with the military. This is something that they're very interested in, okay? Poor sleep quality in undergraduate students is related to greater depressive symptoms. Have a negative cognitive bias. I think we all can say that. Certain periods of the semester, your students are pissed off. REM sleep deprivation is reported to impair memory consolidation. There's increases in serum glucocorticoid levels. Here's a very interesting one. 17 to 19 hours of consecutive wakefulness. This isn't like staying up all night. This is like waking up at 6 and staying up till 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning. Individual performance on a range of tasks was equivalent to that of a person with a blood alcohol content of 0.05. So just staying up till 12 or 1 o'clock at night and having to make important decisions, like maybe even driving, it's like you got a couple beers on you. You know, I wish there was a breathalyzer for that. And that's actually, we're going to bring this up here a little bit later. Total sleep deprivation, they show that there's reduced in psychomotor performance. Longer periods without sleep have a greater effect on cognitive performance. Decreases in speed, greater decrements in accuracy. Mood measures are more sensitive than cognitive tasks. I think this is really important. Your perception of effort, your perception of the task at hand changes when you're in a sleep-deprived or sleep-restricted state. That's really important. Think about an RPE scale, right? You have somebody 70% VO2 max on a bike for 30 minutes, okay? And then you sleep-deprive them for 36 hours and have them do it again, and you have an RPE or do a wellness assessment. They're gonna say that for the most part, this was harder, even though it really wasn't. So their perception of effort changes, and that can also change your effort and how long you're willing to go. Tasks requiring short duration, high intensity efforts are mostly unaffected by 1 or several nights of sleep deprivation, which is very interesting. Long duration endurance performance appears to be negatively affected by total sleep deprivation. And a lot of this research comes out of the military. They'll sleep deprive people and make them ruck for 36 hours. Because that may be part of their operation. A lot of times now they're not just dropping people in, they have to go take 24 to 48 hours to get to where their objective is. Sorry, this is small. Fulliger, who's actually now the high performance manager at the University of Oregon, his research is in sleep. He put out one great paper. I mean, it's a fantastic paper reviewing sleep and athletic performance, and my challenge to any of you is to just write one good paper. And if it's on a fringe topic, people are gonna recognize you. So I actually met him, I told Hugh, I'm like, I'm using your stuff. I mean, you did a great job. But he talks about effects of sleep loss and cognitive function, possible issues, time pressure errors increase, more errors in time-affected sports, such as like maybe a shot clock in basketball, okay, where you got a time, the time's ticking down. Response times can slow, decrease reaction times for sprinters, a batter versus a pitcher. Both short-term memory recall and long-term memory recall can be reduced. That's really important. You break the huddle as a quarterback, you get out there, you're trying to read the field. You've been sleep deprived all week because you have exams. Maybe your ability to recognize blitz pickup is altered. These are just thoughts. This is what people are thinking right now. So key points: total sleep deprivation may affect exercise and performance by reducing motivation and changing your perception of effort. I think this is really a key deal right here. Your perception of training, your perception of a game, your, psychomotor abilities are impaired, and ability to reason, problem solve, organize information, and execute plans. That's a team. That's what a team's composed of, okay? We're gonna shift here, and I'm gonna buzz through a little bit of this, but basically I'm gonna tell you this, completely inconclusive on all fronts, okay? So I'm gonna show you some studies, but sleep restriction and aerobic exercise, there's mixed results from the same authors doing the same thing. No change in maximally sustained exercise intensity during incremental cycloergometry. Mugen et al. Same group, same authors found no change or mean or peak power changes or velocity on a Wingate cycle test. Same group found that maximal work rate was decreased after cycling to exhaustion. Mean and peak power during Wingate cycles tests have been shown to decrease in students, football players, judo competitors following 4 hours of sleep restriction for one night. Here's the hard thing about these types of studies. What happened the previous 2 weeks? You see what I'm saying? That's really, really hard. I'm going to show you a study here in a little bit done by Sherry Ma at Stanford University, and that's kind of like the seminal study right now done on sleep. But it's really hard to know, did one night's sleep really affect somebody, or even just 3 nights on performance? What happened the previous 2 weeks? Well, we don't know. So potentially these are reasons why aerobic exercise tolerance may be reduced, and we're talking to a group of exercise scientists, so this is pretty important. Potential impairment of aerobic pathways and increased perceived exertion. I think this is a big one right here. Okay, I don't think that human physiology downregulates itself so much after 12 hours of sleep restriction, but maybe your perception of work. Neuromuscular fatigue, increased perceived exertion followed by a reduction in power output. Maybe central drive is reduced. Mixed results with muscular strength and power. 24 hours of sleep loss had no adverse effects on weightlifting performance. They did maximal efforts in clean and jerk and snatch. Have you ever had an all-nighter, the next day you feel fine, it's the following day that you're just like, ugh. Or you have to give a 1 rep max, that's what they're kind of looking at. Sometimes you can gut that out, you know what I'm saying? Sleep restriction for 3 consecutive nights, wherein subjects only received 3 hours per night, there was a significant reduction in submaximal and maximal weightlifting tasks. To me though, here's the key question. How does sleep restriction affect repeated bouts of physical activity as seen in training or games? Okay, so I'm not so much interested in a weightlifting competition, although that's important, but I'm interested in a 3-hour football game or a 4-hour baseball game. Okay, you guys, I don't know if many of you remember, but in the 90s there was a huge epidemic of speed derivatives used in baseball because they're traveling so much. They've changed a lot of these schedules, these flight schedules. Guys weren't sleeping, and then baseball. I love baseball, but it's boring. You get there 3 hours before you do. Yeah, no, Dr. It's not boring. But if you ask anybody that's in baseball, the process of the game is incredibly boring. And you get there 3 hours before, you do batting practice, and then you're a role player. You do nothing. You sit on the bench. These guys are popping speed so that they can stay awake and stay into the game, okay? So I'm really interested in how does this sleep restriction or deprivation affect repeated efforts over a long period of time? You're now not going to pass me.
No, it's going to save it every night.
Oh, good. Okay, we're on the same page. That's very important.
I once asked one of the pitchers for the White Sox why they were chewing so much tobacco. And he said, well, I got to sit in the bullpen all day and nicotine keeps me awake.
There you go. You got to do something. Reduction in sports-specific skill following sleep restriction in dart players, tennis players, and handball goalkeepers. So they found that if you had sleep restriction, you had a reduction in these fine motor tasks. Swimming performance, however, did not differ between a sleep-restricted state and a normal night's sleep for elite swimmers. So here's the take-home point. Sleep restriction can have a greater impact on sports that require a high degree of cognitive performance and fine motor skill compared to gross motor execution like a swimming stroke. It's very interesting. I don't know who's keeping track of dart players, but I know that bowlers in cricket, that's a really big subject study because internationally that's a huge game with big financial implications. So that's very interesting. here's the last study I'm going to show you. The reason I'm going to show you this, if you haven't heard of Sherry Ma, this should be for every master's student here. She hasn't even gotten her PhD. She did one big study on sleep and athletic performance, and she is considered the sleep guru. Like, everybody goes to Sherry Ma. So she did something that was relevant, people caught on to it. So she looked at the effect of sleep extension, because most of the studies done out there are on sleep restriction or deprivation. She looked at sleep extension on athletic performance in collegiate basketball players at Stanford University. So she had 11 males from Stanford over this period of 2005 to 2008. Okay, the N was 11, just keep that in your mind here, all right? Subjects maintained habitual sleep habits for 2 to 4 weeks. Now this is Stanford, all right? These are students that aren't taking basket weaving. They're taking like engineering or astrophysics or whatever, you know, and they're student athletes. So they had them wear actigraphy watches, and then they also had them keep a journal, because that's really important, because most people grossly overestimate how much sleep they actually get. So for their first 2 to 4 weeks, they averaged about 6 hours, 6.6 hours of sleep. Then for a 5 to 7 week period, she said, look, I want you to try to sleep as much as you can with the goal of 10 hours in bed each night. Wrist-worn actigraphy showed that they increased their sleep to about 8.4 hours, okay? So here's what happened. After basketball practice, every single day, they measured different skills that they thought were associated with basketball performance. This was not in-game performance, okay? This is just things that they thought were associated with performance. So for instance, 282-foot sprint, there was a huge reduction in speed. Free throw percentage almost improved 10% during the sleep extension period. Three-point field accuracy also increased by almost 10%. So this is at the end of a practice. They take 10 shots type of deal, and they almost had a 10% increase. I don't know any coach out there that wouldn't take a 10% increase. Now, ironically, this was not mentioned in the study. This is also kind of the same period of time where Stanford basketball was doing really good. So I don't know if it was because they had good players, or maybe they're a little short. Because 11 people, that's a significant population on your basketball team. Maybe they had a little bit more awareness of their sleep habits. But this is like the seminal study, and a lot of people cite this study because it actually uses athletes. And it's not about sleep restriction, it's about sleep extension. What are the possibilities if we get adequate sleep? Does anybody really know what a perfect night's sleep for every individual is? No. And that's something that our data that we're just starting to comb through is starting to show some very, very interesting results. So let's get to the study, or actually let's get to my model, okay? So I've got this background on different things that can be affected. Sleep, I think, affects 3 major buckets when it comes to performance. The first is the physiological part. Endocrine, cardiopulmonary, nervous system. If anybody ascribes to functional systems theory, you can read about it. I know Chris Morris has presented on it quite a bit. But if you're limiting adaptation processes and you're basically limiting the ability of human physiology to adapt to the special needs of the sport, your special work capacity can be reduced to execute the functional system required for that sport. They're even showing now that sleep can affect gene expression. So if you have a reduced or suboptimal level of sleep, I think it can affect human physiology. I think it definitely affects behavior. The literature definitely shows that. If you have a sleep-restricted state, your mood, your perception of effort, psychomotor vigilance, and your perception of just your wellness, how you feel, can be altered. Then the last part is a psychomotor domain. Memory consolidation, learning, skill acquisition, decision-making, coordination, fine motor skills can also be affected. So these are the 3 big buckets that I think sleep affects that then in turn affect performance, whether it's the adaptation process or actual game day. So sleep aims to determine the effect of sleep on game performance. This was a big question, okay? How are we actually going to look at how somebody performs in game? So we decided to look at 2 separate things. The first is a coach's grading system. This is right in the middle of objective and subjective. There is literature in rugby and different other sports where if you have a systematic process for grading game effort, then it can be considered valid and reliable for how somebody performs over a period of time. So what every single player has that played in the game is they have I made this small, but I can just, for a specific reason, but it has the player's number, how many plays they played, and then the coaches have very specific criteria that never change for performance as an offensive lineman, performance as a tight end, and they grade the film the following day based off of these parameters. Did the guy just even execute the right task? Did he execute, so for instance, did he try to block the end? Okay, that maybe once, did he actually accomplish it? Maybe that's another part of this equation, okay? Did the quarterback take the right drop? Did he have the right progression? So a lot of this has nothing to do with how the team performs. So we've had some players have game bests, rated out 98 out of 100%, and we got completely slaughtered. All right, because at the end of the day, it's a group of individuals working as a team. Some guys can perform at their best, and some guys may not have a great day. Like, you know, the Minnesota Vikings had a great playoff run. I know you probably heard over this one. Anybody Minnesota Vikings fan? The kicker missed the field goal at the very end, you know, and it sucks, but everybody had a great game, and he didn't. The other part was using athlete tracking systems. This is a very interesting thing that we're looking at is now the tactics of the game can change performance output. So for instance, if you play a team that's very pro-style offense oriented and they're running the ball all the time, you're not going to typically see as many high-speed efforts because the game is condensed. Versus if you're playing a team that spreads the ball out, likes to throw the ball over the field, you're probably going to see higher efforts of speed. But we're looking at this anyway, so we have velocity metrics, 3D accelerometry data, distance, inertial movement analysis, which can show high intensity, acceleration, deceleration. This is some really high-level stuff that the guys actually wear in game. I'm sorry if I'm boring you. I just wanted to say that. My hypothesis is that sleep restriction over a period of 5 to 7 days, so we're going to look at the week before, I'm going to call that chronic sleep restriction, will produce greater decrements in game performance as measured by our grading system, and potentially tracking parameters compared to adequate sleep or an acute night's sleep of sleep restriction. So I'm calling adequate sleep 7 hours or more. Now, this is a global thing right here. We've just started looking at the data. We're also going to have to do individual analysis because everybody's different. For anybody to assume that there's just standard, you know, prescriptions that everybody's going to follow is wrong. We found that certain guys, 6 hours is enough. And there's kind of like this inverted U scenario. They get too much, things start going down. They get too little, things start going down. But then this little sweet spot for somebody, 6 to 6.5 hours, may be perfect. But globally right now we're looking at that. But it's preliminary. Some confounding variables. From a physiological standpoint, training load as is assessed by subjective RPE and catapult loads, that could affect things, okay? So if a coach decides, screw it, we're going to pound these guys this week, they may get adequate sleep, but that could affect their physiological adaptation. Behavior, performance anxiety, their skill relative to the competition. This is a big one. So I could be a freshman that's got pretty good skill, that sleeps really well, and I still get pounded. Okay, I'm a freshman versus a senior that plays at such and such, you know what I'm saying? Those one-on-one matchups can really change things. Performance anxiety experience, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. So these can affect behavior and the psychomotor domain. That's why this coaching grading system is pretty much a catch-all for all certain things because it kind of filters this stuff out. Our methodology, we're going to review an existing data set with the University of Kentucky football team during the 2015 preseason and season, so this data was already taken. We have 28 subjects. Their participation in different questions will be based off of their injuries, their compliance, etc. So some people were more compliant than others. Some guys were very compliant, had an injury, so some of the data was taken out. So, but we have a total of 28 subjects, which is really, really good. How we're going to quantify this, how we're quantifying sleep, we're using wrist-worn actigraphy. It's a valid and reliable method. Really what it comes down to wrist-worn actigraphy, all the extra bells and whistles is the algorithms they use that can look at extra things. It's very good at predicting fatigue states. They have different mathematical models to predict alertness, performance, and fatigue risk. We are using a company called Fatigue Science. This is kind of the gold standard for sleep is polysomnography. This is kind of the gold standard for actigraphy right now. They're using something called the SAFE-T model, and it came out of the Department of Defense, so this was actually designed for pilots, okay? Because what they wanted to do was their algorithms actually learn kind of your circadian process a little bit, your rhythmicity, and it can predict alertness. Remember I showed you that blood alcohol content deal, like so many hours of wakefulness can be associated with this. They actually wanted to go, okay, I got a pilot flying a $1 billion plane. He hasn't gotten enough sleep. I want to make sure that if he's flying this jet, that he's in a mental effectiveness zone that's not going to put us at risk or anybody else at risk. It's used by the coal mining industry, the railroad industry. It accurately estimates the impact of scheduling factors and sleep history and the safety and productivity. It's been independently validated. It's an accurate predictor for sleep restriction and subjective fatigue ratings. Really awesome stuff. So here's an example of a printout we may get. This is an actual athlete. Okay, so we can see his average mental effectiveness. This is the green. That's how's his cognitive processing work, sleep time, sleep latency, wake episodes, lots of great data. It's true actigraphy. Tyler was a big part of this. He still is a big part of this, filtering the data. We can look at an athlete we actually use as a counsel off of. So like, hey, we want somebody in the mental effective zone of 90% plus on game day. We can look at breakdown of guys. We can go, hey man, you were spending 20, this is out here, but like 25% of your time was at 70 to 80% mental effectiveness, which was like blowing a .05. We had guys who found like 15 to 30% of their time were in this, this equivalent right here. Reaction time can be slow by 55%. You're telling me you're giving up 55% to your opponent? I mean, it's pretty unbelievable. Research aimed to determine how sleep affects objective measures of biological states of readiness measured by the omega wave system. My hypothesis is that chronic and acute sleep restriction and chronic and acute increases in practice load will be correlated with measures of DC potential and HRV parameters. One thing that I'm working with Dr. Stromberg right now is trying to figure out, we're trying to create a mathematical model for, okay, if you practice X amount, does sleep act as a buffer in that process to regulate, or so for instance, if I practice, let's say 1,000 units of workload is a ton. If I then got 10 hours of sleep, can I adapt to that stressor? Versus if I did 1,000 units of workload and got 6 hours of sleep. How does sleep act as a buffer in that process? That's something that we're working on right now, and that takes way higher order math skills than I've been equipped with. Oh my God. So in this process right here, we're looking at how sleep affects physiology, compounding variables, training load from practice, personal life stress. This is a huge one. This is massive right here. This can affect a lot of stuff. This can throw off a lot of things. You never know. Your kid's parents have a divorce. Did something happen in their personal life? Did they just break up with their girlfriend? Whatever. That can affect all this type of stuff. And the third question is determine how periods of academic stress affect sleep parameters and how periods of academic stress affect biological readiness parameters. There's a great study done by Dr. Mann at the University of Missouri on their football team showing that during periods of high academic stress, like midterms, final exams, there was a much higher risk of injury, okay? So my hypothesis is that periods of academic stress, midterms, the week before Thanksgiving and final exams, which were identified by our athletic academic department, will negatively affect sleep parameters such as latencies, sleep episodes, efficiency. In addition, there will be an acute drift towards sympathetic dominance in HRV parameters. So we're going to look at how sleep affects physiology, or academic stress affects physiology and sleep. Once again, some confounding variables, training load from practice. So you could have a hard midterm week and a ton of practice, and that can really kind of compound effects. Personal life and stress, and I'd say past experience and test anxiety. So if you have a freshman that's not used to college midterms, they may be freaking out a little bit versus that senior that's been through it, it's not new, okay, I'd say maybe they just don't care, or they just don't have as much anxiety because they know how to prepare by now. They have a couple years under their belt, a little bit more saddle time. So that's it. I really want to thank my committee, Dr. Shapiro, Abel, Stromberg, and Dr. Butterfield. I want to thank Coach Stoops for letting this be a part of our football operations. Tyler Linden has been absolutely huge as a research assistant. This guy's really, really smart and super helpful. And then my wife for putting up with me and for like letting me actually go down this pathway. So got all the references here. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
So I enjoyed it, Eric. What about sleep, natural sleep